I'm Audrey Mitchell, 35 years old, standing outside Mitchell Gardens estate, watching guests arrive for my cousin Stephanie's wedding. My stomach twists reading her email for the 100th time. Sorry, but we've reached capacity and can't accommodate you at the wedding. Ironic, considering this venue has been in our family for generations. What they don't know is that 3 years ago, I secretly bought it from my uncle when he needed cash. Taking a deep breath, I straighten my blazer. Time to walk through those doors anyway. Before I dive into this story, where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments. If my family drama resonates with you, hit that like button and subscribe. Trust me, you'll want to see how this unexpected reunion unfolds when they discover who really owns the place where every Mitchell gets married. Growing up as the black sheep of the wealthy Mitchell family wasn't easy. From an early age, I knew I was different. While my cousins embraced the family's social status, attending elite private schools and summer camps in the Hamptons, I preferred books and quiet activities. My parents, unlike the rest of the Mitchell clan, valued simplicity despite our family money. They encouraged me to find my own path rather than following the prescribed Mitchell lifestyle. Everything changed when I was 15. My parents died in a car accident returning from a charity event during a snowstorm. One moment, I had loving parents who understood me. The next, I was orphaned and placed with my mother's sister, Aunt Catherine, and her husband, Uncle Robert. They had 3 children of their own: Stephanie, Brian, and James. On paper, they did everything right. I had my own room in their mansion, attended the same prestigious school as my cousins, and never wanted for material things. But emotional warmth? That was in short supply. Aunt Catherine never recovered from losing her sister. Instead of embracing me as a living connection to my mother, she seemed to find my presence painful. Uncle Robert was perpetually busy with the family investment firm, barely acknowledging my existence beyond funding my education. They fulfilled their obligation, nothing more. My cousins took their cues from their parents. Stephanie, only 2 months younger than me, made it her mission to emphasize my outsider status. She'd forget to tell me about family outings, throw parties when I was away, and constantly remind others I wasn't a real Mitchell like them. Brian, the oldest, simply ignored me. Only James, the youngest, occasionally showed kindness when his siblings weren't looking. Despite this environment, or perhaps because of it, I focused on building my own life. I worked hard in school, earned scholarships to college, and refused family money for graduate school. While the Mitchells expected me to fail without their support, I thrived. By 30, I had built a successful real estate investment company. I specialized in historic properties, preserving their character while making them profitable, a skill none of my family appreciated or even knew about. The Mitchell Gardens estate held a special place in our family history. The sprawling property with its colonial mansion and meticulously maintained gardens had hosted 5 generations of Mitchell weddings. My own parents married there, their happiness captured in photos I still treasure. Despite my strained relationship with the family, the venue represented a connection to my parents that I cherished. 3 years ago, I discovered through industry connections that Uncle Robert was quietly selling the estate. The family business had taken some hits, and he needed capital without admitting financial weakness to his social circle. Acting quickly, I created a holding company that kept my name off public records and purchased the property before it hit the market. My uncle never knew I was the buyer. I retained all the staff, many who remembered me as a child, and they loyally kept my ownership private at my request. The wedding invitation arrived 6 months ago. Stephanie was marrying David Reynolds, son of a family in the Mitchells' social circle. I was surprised to be included but took it as perhaps a small olive branch. I RSVP'd promptly and even bought an expensive gift from their registry. Then, 2 weeks before the wedding, the email arrived. Dear Audrey, due to final adjustments in our seating arrangements and venue capacity limits, we regrettably must inform you that we will be unable to accommodate you at the wedding. We apologize for any inconvenience. Best wishes, Stephanie. I called her immediately, my hands shaking with anger and hurt. Stephanie, what's this about capacity issues? The venue can hold 250 people. And last we spoke, you had 180 guests. There was a pause before she dropped all pretense. Look, Audrey, you were only invited as a courtesy. No one actually wants you there. Mom thought it would look bad to exclude you entirely, but some of David's college friends became available last minute, and they're simply more important to us. I'm sure you understand. I didn't understand. Not then. But I would make sure they all understood soon enough. After that devastating phone call with Stephanie, I spent the evening cycling through emotions: hurt, anger, resignation, and finally, determination. The next morning, I met my friends Rachel and Jason for our weekly breakfast at our favorite cafe. They'd been my rocks since college, the family I chose rather than the one I was born into. She actually uninvited you? By email? Rachel's voice rose enough that nearby diners glanced our way. She'd never liked my family, especially after witnessing their behavior at my graduate school commencement years ago. That's a new low, even for Stephanie, Jason said, stirring his coffee absently. He'd worked as a psychologist long enough to understand family dynamics but was still shocked by my relative's capacity for casual cruelty. "What are you going to do?" Rachel asked, reaching across to squeeze my hand. I took a deep breath. "I'm thinking about going anyway." They both looked surprised. Jason leaned forward. "As what? An uninvited guest?" "As the owner of the venue." The words felt powerful as I said them aloud for the first time. Rachel's eyes widened. "They still don't know you own it? After 3 years?" I shook my head. "The holding company keeps my name off everything. Thomas, the venue manager, knows of course, and some of the staff who've been there since I was a kid. But Uncle Robert sold to what he thought was just another investment group." "Oh my God," Rachel's surprise transformed into a delighted grin. "Their faces when they find out. I need pictures." Jason was more measured. "Are you sure this is the right approach? It's going to cause drama, and you've worked hard to build a peaceful life away from their toxicity." His concern was valid. For years, I'd carefully constructed boundaries to protect myself from my family's behavior. I'd declined holiday gatherings that left me feeling like an intruder, avoided family cruises where I'd be trapped with their subtle jabs for days, and focused on building my own traditions. Going to this wedding meant willingly stepping back into the fray. "I've thought about that," I admitted. "But this isn't just about Stephanie's wedding, it's about Mitchell Gardens. It's the one place I feel connected to my parents. Every Mitchell for 5 generations has married there. I didn't buy it to use as leverage. I bought it to preserve something that matters to me. I can't let them take that away, too." After breakfast, I drove to Mitchell Gardens to meet with Thomas, the venue manager who'd worked there since I was a child. He'd been my ally since I purchased the property, understanding my reasons for keeping ownership quiet. "Miss Audrey," he greeted me warmly as I entered his office. "Everything's on track for Saturday's event." "About that, Thomas." I settled into the chair across from his desk. "I'm planning to attend." His eyebrows rose. "I was under the impression you weren't on the guest list." Miss Stephanie was quite clear about that when she revised numbers last week. "I wasn't invited," I confirmed. "But I think it's time the family knows who really owns this place." Thomas was quiet for a moment, then smiled. "It's been a long time coming, if you ask me." He filled me in on concerning demands the family had been making of the staff, changing agreements last minute, expecting special treatment, speaking condescendingly to servers. "Your uncle acts like he still owns the place," Thomas confided, telling my staff how things should be done, reminding everyone how the Mitchells have standards. As I left Thomas's office and walked the grounds, memories flooded back. My parents dancing under the garden pergola at my aunt's wedding. My mother showing me how different roses in the garden had been planted by different generations of Mitchell women. The last family event I attended here before today, my cousin Brian's graduation party 6 years ago, where I'd spent the evening alone at a corner table while the family celebrated around me. The path to healing isn't always gentle. Sometimes it requires standing your ground, even when it's uncomfortable. During the days leading up to the wedding, I prepared carefully. I chose a professional outfit, not flashy enough to seem like I was competing with the bride, but elegant enough to command respect. I rehearsed what I might say in different scenarios. I reminded myself that no matter what happened, I would remain dignified. As Saturday arrived and I drove toward the estate, doubts crept in. Was I making a mistake? Would this create a permanent rift in an already damaged family? I thought of my parents and what they would advise. My mother had always taught me to be true to myself, but kind to others. My father believed in standing up for what was right, even when it was difficult. I parked my car and sat for a moment, gathering courage. Then Thomas appeared at my window. "They've been making a fuss all morning," he said quietly. "Your uncle tried to have a server fired for bringing the wrong champagne. That did it. It was time for the Mitchells to learn who really owned their precious family venue." I stepped out of the car and toward the grand entrance, where guests were already beginning to arrive. Mitchell Gardens estate looked magnificent that afternoon. The late summer sun cast a golden glow across the immaculately trimmed lawns, and white roses, Stephanie's chosen flower, adorned every archway and pillar. The colonial mansion's facade had been recently restored under my direction, its classic lines emphasizing timeless elegance rather than ostentatious wealth. Ironically, Stephanie had raved about these improvements in her wedding planning emails, never knowing her outcast cousin had commissioned them. Guests in formal attire streamed through the main entrance, where staff I employed checked names against the guest list. I chose a side entrance, one that led through the east garden and directly into the main hall. As I approached, I could see the ceremony space through the windows. Rows of white chairs facing a flower-adorned arch, positioned to frame the estate's signature view of the rolling hills beyond. I smoothed my navy blue dress, professional yet appropriate for a wedding, and entered through the side door. A few guests glanced my way, most not recognizing me or assuming I belonged. I made it halfway across the main hall before Brian, my oldest cousin, intercepted me. "Audrey?" His expression shifted from confusion to annoyance. "What are you doing here?" "Hello, Brian," I replied calmly, though my heart raced. "Lovely day for a wedding." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You weren't on the guest list. You need to leave." A few nearby guests turned to watch, sensing conflict. I maintained my composure, something I'd practiced extensively in business negotiations. "I have every right to be here," I said, keeping my voice even. "No, you don't." Brian's face flushed. "Stephanie was clear about this. We don't have room for you." I glanced around the spacious hall. The venue seems to have plenty of room. Our exchange had drawn attention. Whispers spread among guests. And soon Aunt Catherine approached, her face a mask of controlled displeasure beneath her expensive hat. "Audrey," she said, her voice chilly. "This is a surprise." "Hello, Aunt Catherine," I replied. "You look well." She didn't acknowledge the pleasantry. "Stephanie was quite clear in her communication with you, I believe. This is her special day, and we're following her wishes. I must ask you to respect that and leave." I felt all the old pain rising. Years of being treated as an unwelcome obligation rather than family. But today was different. Today, I had solid ground to stand on. "I understand Stephanie's wishes," I said, "but I'm afraid I won't be leaving." Aunt Catherine's eyes narrowed. "Then I'll have security escort you out." "I don't think that will be happening." Thomas had appeared at my side, his presence providing quiet support. Aunt Catherine turned to him. "Thomas, please call security. We have an uninvited guest." Thomas looked uncomfortable but resolute. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Mitchell, but I can't do that. Miss Audrey has every right to be here." Confusion crossed Aunt Catherine's face. "What are you talking about? She's not on the guest list." More family members had gathered around us now, including Uncle Robert and several cousins. The murmurs grew louder. Before Thomas could explain, a commotion at the main entrance drew everyone's attention. Stephanie had arrived early to check final details and noticed the gathering in the hall. She marched over in her casual clothes, not yet changed into her wedding dress, her face stormy. "What is she doing here?" she demanded, glaring at me. "I made it perfectly clear you weren't invited." The hall had grown quiet, other guests pretending not to listen while watching intently. "I came to see the venue," I said simply. "The venue?" Stephanie scoffed. "You can book a tour any other day of the year. Get out before you ruin everything." "Thomas, call security." Thomas stepped forward, visibly uncomfortable. "Miss Stephanie, I can't remove Miss Audrey from the premises." "Why the hell not?" Stephanie demanded. Thomas glanced at me, silently asking permission. I gave a slight nod. Because, he said carefully, Miss Audrey is an important client of Mitchell Gardens. A confused silence fell over the group. What are you talking about? Uncle Robert asked sharply. What kind of client? Thomas hesitated again, and I decided to intervene before he was forced to reveal more than necessary at this point. It's a business matter, I said. But don't worry, I have no intention of disrupting Stephanie's wedding. I'll stay in the background. Stephanie wasn't satisfied. This is my day, and I decide who stays and who goes. I don't care what kind of client you are. Stephanie. A calm male voice broke through the tension. David, her fiancé, had joined our group. He was tall and had kind eyes that surveyed the scene with concern. What's going on? My cousin crashed our wedding after I specifically told her not to come, Stephanie fumed. And apparently she has some mysterious business with the venue that makes everyone afraid to throw her out. David looked at me, then at the growing crowd of uncomfortable guests. Let's take a step back here. This is supposed to be a happy day. He turned to me. You're Audrey, right? Stephanie's mentioned you. I doubted those mentions were flattering, but I appreciated his attempt at diplomacy. Yes. Congratulations on your marriage. David nodded, then gently took Stephanie's arm. The ceremony starts in 40 minutes. We have more important things to focus on right now. He looked at me. If Audrey promises to stay out of the way and not cause any issues, perhaps we can sort this out later? Stephanie looked like she wanted to argue but then glanced at the watching guests. Fine, she said through gritted teeth. She can stay for the ceremony. In the back row. But this isn't over. As the group dispersed, I caught Uncle Robert studying me with suspicion. Thomas guided me to a seat in the very last row, far from the family section. That went well, he murmured with gentle sarcasm. I took my seat, feeling strangely calm despite the confrontation. The first battle was over, but the war had just begun. As guests filed into the ceremony space, I kept my promise to remain unobtrusive, sitting quietly in my back row seat. Several relatives glanced back at me with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. Cousin James gave me a hesitant wave when his parents weren't looking. At least someone acknowledged my existence without anger. The ceremony began traditionally, with music swelling as the bridal party entered. I had to admit, Stephanie looked beautiful in her designer gown, her smile radiant as she walked down the aisle toward David. For a moment, I felt a pang of something like regret. Not for coming, but for the relationship we might have had as cousins if circumstances had been different. The officiant began with words about family bonds that struck painfully close to home. Marriage isn't just the union of two people, but of two families coming together, supporting each other through life's challenges, never turning away from one another in times of need. I nearly laughed at the irony, but maintained my composure. The ceremony continued smoothly until halfway through, when the venue's lighting system suddenly dimmed, then brightened, then dimmed again. The officiant paused, looking confused. Thomas, standing discreetly at the back, immediately moved to check the control panel. The glitch lasted only seconds before the lights stabilized, but I noticed Uncle Robert glancing back at me with suspicion, as if I'd somehow caused the interruption. I kept my face neutral, though internally I was concerned. The lighting system had been upgraded just months ago under my direction. After Stephanie and David exchanged vows and were pronounced husband and wife, guests moved to the garden terrace for cocktails, while the main hall was transformed for the reception. I maintained a low profile, finding a quiet corner where I could observe without drawing attention. This didn't last long. As waiters circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres, I noticed the DJ setting up his equipment had become frustrated. Thomas hurried over to assist, and they spoke in hushed, urgent tones. Curious and concerned, I approached them. Is there a problem? The DJ looked relieved to see me. Miss Mitchell, the sound system is giving me trouble. The connection keeps dropping. Thomas gave me a meaningful look. I was about to call our technical team. Let me take a look first, I offered, setting down my untouched champagne. I'd overseen the installation of the new sound system and knew its quirks. As I helped troubleshoot the issue, I felt a presence behind me. Uncle Robert stood watching, his expression unreadable. "Since when are you an expert on sound equipment, Audrey?" he asked, his tone suggesting he found it inappropriate for me to be involved. "I know a few things," I replied vaguely, locating the loose connection and securing it. The speakers immediately came to life with the playlist Stephanie had selected. The DJ thanked me profusely, which only deepened my uncle's suspicion. Before he could question me further, Thomas was called away by kitchen staff reporting another issue with the catering. Without thinking, I followed him. In the kitchen, chaos reigned. The refrigeration unit had malfunctioned, threatening the elaborate dessert display Stephanie had insisted on. "We need to move everything to the backup unit in the east wing," I said automatically, falling into problem-solving mode. The head chef looked to me for confirmation. Right away. "Miss Mitchell." Uncle Robert, who had followed us, didn't miss this exchange. "Why are the staff taking orders from you, Audrey? And why do they keep calling you Miss Mitchell as if you're in charge here?" I hesitated, but before I could respond, another crisis emerged. The wedding cake delivery had arrived damaged. The top tier was sliding precariously. "Get the emergency kit from my office," I told Thomas. "The one with the cake, supports, and extra fondant." Minutes later, I was in the prep kitchen with the pastry chef, stabilizing the cake structure and touching up the damaged areas. Years of owning historic properties had taught me to prepare for any contingency, including wedding day disasters. When I emerged, I found not just Uncle Robert waiting, but Aunt Catherine and several other family members. "What's going on, Audrey?" Aunt Catherine demanded. "Why are you interfering with everything?" "I'm helping," I replied. "There were some technical issues." "That's the venue staff's job," Stephanie hissed, having joined the group. "Stop trying to make this day about you." "I'm not," I began. But she cut me off. "First, you show up uninvited. Then you're everywhere, touching everything, giving orders. It's pathetic how desperate you are for attention." Her words stung, but I maintained my composure. The issues needed addressing. The reception can proceed as planned now. "Thanks to you, I'm sure," Stephanie said sarcastically. "Our savior. What would we do without Audrey Mitchell swooping in to rescue us?" I noticed David watching from a distance, his expression concerned but not hostile like the others. Thomas stood nearby, clearly uncomfortable with the confrontation but ready to intervene if needed. "I think we should all calm down," I suggested. "This is your wedding day, Stephanie. Let's not make a scene." "A scene you created by coming where you're not wanted," she snapped. Uncle Robert stepped closer. "There's something you're not telling us, Audrey. The staff treats you like you own the place." His eyes narrowed. "What's your connection to Mitchell Gardens? And don't tell me it's just business." I felt all eyes on me, the pressure of years of family secrets and resentments building to this moment. But before I could decide how to respond, the reception coordinator announced it was time for the bride and groom's entrance, temporarily diffusing the situation. As guests moved to the main hall, I lingered behind, knowing this reprieve was temporary. The truth would come out soon, one way or another. The reception began with Stephanie and David's grand entrance, the guests applauding as they took their first dance. I kept to the periphery, sipping water and observing the celebration from a distance. Despite my efforts to blend into the background, I felt eyes on me continuously, family members watching, wondering, whispering. The first hour passed relatively smoothly. Speeches were given, toasts were made, and the initial dinner courses were served without incident. I began to think perhaps the confrontation had passed, that I could maintain my low profile until making a quiet exit later. Then the problems began again. First, the microphone cut out during Uncle Robert's speech about Mitchell family values and traditions of excellence. The irony wasn't lost on me. Thomas scrambled to fix it while my uncle glared in my direction as if I had somehow sabotaged him. Next, one of the vintage chandeliers, original to the building and meticulously restored under my direction, began flickering ominously. Thomas and the maintenance manager conferred in hushed tones before adjusting something at the electrical panel. "Just a power surge," Thomas announced to concerned guests. Nothing to worry about. But I was worried. Mitchell Gardens rarely had technical issues, especially not multiple problems in one evening. As owner, I took pride in the venue's flawless operation. These glitches were unusual and concerning. My professional concern overrode my desire to remain inconspicuous. I approached Thomas during a quiet moment. "What's really going on?" I asked. "These aren't normal issues." Thomas lowered his voice. "The new assistant manager made some unauthorized changes to the electrical system yesterday to accommodate Stephanie's last-minute lighting requests. Bypassed some safety features. I only discovered it an hour ago." I frowned. "That's dangerous. We need to—" "Everything all right here?" Uncle Robert's voice interrupted us. He had approached silently, champagne in hand, his expression suspicious. "Just discussing the electrical issues," I said carefully. "Yes, quite unusual for Mitchell Gardens," he replied, watching my face. "The venue has always prided itself on perfection. In all the years I owned it, we never had technical failures during an event." The emphasis on his former ownership was subtle but clear. I met his gaze steadily. "Properties change over time," I said. "New systems, new challenges." "Indeed." He sipped his champagne. "Tell me, Audrey, why are the staff treating you like you're in charge here?" The direct question hung between us. Before I could formulate a response, a server hurried over to Thomas. "Sir, there's an issue with the kitchen refrigeration again. Chef says it's urgent." Thomas looked to me for guidance. The gesture wasn't lost on Uncle Robert. "Go," I told Thomas. "I'll join you in a minute." As Thomas hurried away, Uncle Robert's eyes narrowed. "Very interesting. My niece, who supposedly works in real estate investment, somehow has authority over venue staff and intimate knowledge of their operations. It's complicated," I admitted. "I'm beginning to see that." His tone hardened. "What game are you playing, Audrey? First you arrive uninvited, and now you're acting like you run the place." I was saved from responding by a crash from the direction of the dessert table. Moving quickly through concerned guests, I found the elaborate chocolate fountain Stephanie had insisted on had malfunctioned, sending warm chocolate cascading onto the floor. Without hesitation, I directed staff to contain the mess, while I personally stabilized the fountain mechanism. Years of property management had taught me practical skills that now proved useful. As I worked, I was keenly aware of the growing crowd watching me. Stephanie pushed through, her wedding dress carefully held away from the chocolate disaster. "What now?" she demanded, then looked accusingly at me. "Of course, you're in the middle of this too." "I'm fixing it," I said calmly, adjusting the flow valve. "Why are you touching everything? Who gave you permission to take over my wedding?" The fountain stabilized, chocolate once again flowing properly through its tiers. I stood, wiping my hands on a napkin. "The problem's resolved," I said. "Your dessert display is safe." Instead of thanks, Stephanie's face contorted with anger and something else. Jealousy, perhaps? She had always resented any attention I received, even as children. "How convenient that everything breaks and then perfect Audrey fixes it," she sneered. "Are you sabotaging my wedding for attention?" Gasps came from nearby guests. I felt my cheeks flush with both anger and embarrassment. "That's absurd," I said quietly. "I would never. First, you show up uninvited. Then suddenly everything starts falling apart, giving you opportunities to play hero?" She was creating a scene now, her voice carrying across the reception. "Always thinking you're better than us. Coming here to show off how successful you are." James, my younger cousin, stepped forward. "Steph, come on. Audrey's helping, not causing problems." "Stay out of this," she snapped at him. "She's not even supposed to be here." I explicitly uninvited her. The ugly truth was out now. Guests murmuring uncomfortably at this confirmation that I was indeed unwelcome. David appeared at Stephanie's side, placing a calming hand on her arm. "Let's take a moment," he suggested quietly. "The fountain's fixed. Let's get back to celebrating." But Uncle Robert had other ideas. He'd gathered several family members, Aunt Catherine, Brian, and a few others, and they approached as a united front. "I think we need to clear up what's happening here," he said firmly. "Audrey, I want you to explain exactly what your connection is to this venue." All eyes turned to me. The moment of truth had arrived sooner than I'd planned. I glanced at Thomas, who stood nearby, his expression encouraging. "I have a professional interest in Mitchell Gardens," I said carefully. Stop being evasive, Uncle Robert demanded. The staff defer to you. You know the systems intimately. What aren't you telling us? James tried again to defuse the situation. Does it matter? She's helping. Let's just enjoy the wedding. It matters, Stephanie interjected. Because she wasn't invited yet, she's acting like she owns the place. The irony of her statement nearly made me laugh. I felt a shift inside me, a release of the need to protect them from the truth I'd hidden for 3 years. There's something you should know, I began. But Stephanie cut me off. Let me guess. You've become so successful you could rent this entire place for a month? Always needing to one-up everyone, aren't you? Uncle Robert scoffed. Don't be ridiculous, Stephanie. Audrey couldn't even afford to rent this place for a dinner party, let alone anything more substantial. Their dismissive attitudes and mocking tones were the final straw. Years of being belittled, excluded, and underestimated crystallized into a moment of perfect clarity. Thomas caught my eye, silently asking if I wanted him to intervene. I gave a slight shake of my head. This was my moment of truth, and I would handle it myself. Uncle Robert gathered a few more family members into our growing circle, his businessman instincts sensing something significant about to unfold. Aunt Catherine stood rigid beside him, her disapproval radiating in waves. Brian hovered protectively near Stephanie, while James lingered on the periphery, looking uncomfortable with the family's united front against me. Let's move this somewhere more private, Uncle Robert suggested, nodding toward a side room off the main hall. The very room where I held monthly staff meetings as the owner. Once inside with the door closed, Uncle Robert took charge. Audrey, enough games. What exactly is your connection to Mitchell Gardens? And why did you come today when you knew you weren't welcome? I took a deep breath, preparing to explain. But Stephanie interrupted. She's just desperate for attention, as always, she snapped, trying to make my wedding about her. That's not true, I said calmly. I would never disrupt your wedding intentionally. Right, Brian scoffed. You just showed up uninvited by coincidence. I came because this venue means something to me, I explained. My parents were married here. It's part of my heritage, too. Stephanie rolled her eyes. Please. You barely remember your parents. The casual cruelty of her statement stunned me into momentary silence. James stepped forward. That was uncalled for, Steph, he said quietly. Aunt Laura and Uncle Michael weren't just Audrey's parents. They were family to all of us. Stay out of this, James, Aunt Catherine warned. You've always had a soft spot for your cousin, but she's disrupting your sister's wedding day. I'm trying to understand why, Uncle Robert said, his tone more measured. What's your real agenda here, Audrey? Is this about money? Do you need a loan? Is that why you're cozying up to the venue staff? I almost laughed at the absurdity. I don't need money from you, Uncle Robert. Then what? Revenge? Are you still bitter that we couldn't give you the same attention as our own children after your parents died? And there it was, the family narrative that had shaped my life for 20 years. Poor, orphaned Audrey, the charity case they'd taken in, should be eternally grateful for whatever scraps of affection they deigned to throw her way. I never expected the same attention, I said, keeping my voice level. But I did expect to be treated with basic respect and kindness. To be included, not just tolerated. We did everything for you, Aunt Catherine exclaimed. Private schools, college tuition, a place in our home. A place, yes, I acknowledged. But never a home, never belonging. So this is your revenge? Stephanie demanded. Crashing my wedding? Making a scene? I didn't make a scene. I tried to help when things went wrong. After declining your invitation, Uncle Robert added, his tone suggesting I'd committed some grave offense. I frowned. What are you talking about? I didn't decline. I was uninvited by Stephanie. A strange silence fell over the room. Aunt Catherine looked at Uncle Robert, confusion evident on her face. That's not what Robert told us, she said slowly. He said you declined the invitation because you were too busy with work. I stared at my uncle, realization dawning. You lied to them? Uncle Robert shifted uncomfortably. I simply smoothed things over. Stephanie mentioned she was considering uninviting you, and I simplified the situation for the family. The second betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Not only had I been excluded, But my uncle had twisted the narrative to make me appear as the one rejecting the family, not the other way around. You let them believe I didn't want to come, I said quietly. That I chose not to be here. It was easier that way, he replied, not quite meeting my eyes. Easier for whom? I asked, anger finally seeping into my voice. It's been 20 years of this, Uncle Robert. 20 years of being erased, excluded, and now actively lied about. Stephanie looked between her father and me, uncertainty crossing her face for the first time. Dad? What's she talking about? Before he could answer, I continued, my composure finally cracking. Did you also tell them why you sold Mitchell Gardens 3 years ago? Or did you keep that secret too? The room went utterly silent. Uncle Robert's face paled. What do you know about that? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I know everything, I replied. I know you sold it quietly because you needed capital after those bad investments in 2020. I know you didn't tell the family because you were too proud to admit you'd lost money. Aunt Catherine turned to her husband. Robert? Is this true? Uncle Robert's jaw tightened. It was a private business decision. The venue was becoming a financial burden. A burden? Brian echoed, clearly hearing this for the first time. But you always said it was our family legacy, that it would never leave Mitchell hands. Sometimes business realities override sentimentality, Uncle Robert said stiffly. Sentimentality, I repeated. Is that what you call 5 generations of family history? Thomas knocked and entered the room, looking apologetic for interrupting. Excuse me, but the guests are wondering about the delay in the cake cutting. Stephanie glared at me, momentarily distracted from her father's revelations. See what you've done? You're ruining everything. I think your father had a head start on that, I replied, my patience finally exhausted. But don't worry. Your wedding can continue without issue. I made sure of that when I bought this place 3 years ago. The words escaped before I could reconsider them. A collective gasp filled the room. What did you just say? Uncle Robert demanded, though his expression suggested he'd already guessed the truth. I straightened my shoulders and met his gaze directly. I said, I bought Mitchell Gardens. I am the owner of this venue, Uncle Robert. I have been for 3 years. The silence that followed was deafening. The stunned silence lasted only seconds before breaking into a cacophony of disbelief. That's impossible, Uncle Robert sputtered, his face flushing red. You're lying, Stephanie accused, her voice rising. You couldn't afford this place. Brian laughed dismissively. This is pathetic, even for you, Audrey. Only James remained quiet, studying my face with dawning realization. I turned to Thomas, who stood by the door. Thomas, could you please confirm for my family who owns Mitchell Gardens estate? Thomas stepped forward, his professional demeanor unwavering despite the tension. Mitchell Gardens is owned by Cornerstone Historic Properties, whose sole proprietor is Miss Audrey Mitchell. She has been the owner for 3 years and 2 months. Uncle Robert collapsed into a nearby chair, the color draining from his face. Cornerstone, you were behind Cornerstone? But they were represented by Wellington Capital Group, a holding company I established specifically for this acquisition, I explained. I wanted the transaction to remain private. But how? Aunt Catherine asked, bewildered. How could you possibly afford to buy this place? I smiled slightly. The real estate investment business I built, the one none of you ever asked about, has been quite successful. I specialize in historic properties. Uncle Robert's eyes narrowed. So you deliberately hid your identity when purchasing family property? Why? To what end? I wasn't hiding, I corrected. I was protecting. When I learned you were selling Mitchell Gardens, I acted quickly to keep it in the family. I knew if you realized I was the buyer, your pride might prevent the sale. This is ridiculous, Stephanie declared, though her voice lacked conviction. Thomas, call the actual owners. This has gone far enough. Thomas remained respectful but firm. Miss Stephanie, Miss Audrey is the owner. All staff report to her. The renovations you've admired, the restored chandeliers, the new garden landscaping, the climate control system that protects the historic architecture, all were directed by Miss Audrey. Disbelief slowly gave way to stunned acceptance as the family processed this revelation. Uncle Robert seemed to age before my eyes, the realization of what had happened clearly devastating his pride. "So, when you came today," James began. "I came to attend a family wedding at a venue I own," I completed his thought. Despite being uninvited, Stephanie shook her head, still processing. "You let me plan my wedding in your venue without telling me? You sat through planning meetings, listened to me talk about my family legacy, and said nothing?" "I kept my ownership quiet to preserve the Mitchell family history, not to deceive you," I explained. "This place matters to me because it connects me to my parents. I didn't want that connection severed just because Uncle Robert made some bad investments." "Bad investments?" Aunt Catherine turned to her husband. "Robert, what is she talking about?" Uncle Robert waved dismissively. "Business matters you wouldn't understand." "I understand perfectly," I countered. "The Mitchell Investment Group lost nearly 30% of its value after the tech sector collapse. You needed liquid assets quickly but didn't want the family or your social circle to know you were in financial trouble. So you quietly put Mitchell Gardens on the market, expecting a quick, discreet sale to an investment group." Brian looked at his father. "Dad? Is this true?" Uncle Robert's silence was confirmation enough. "So you bought it," Aunt Catherine said to me, her tone unreadable. "Why keep it secret all this time?" "At first, I wanted to ensure a smooth transition. Then," I paused, considering my words carefully. "Then I realized none of you ever asked about my life or business. None of you showed interest in who I'd become. It became clear you didn't actually want me as part of the family. So why should I share this with you?" Stephanie's eyes widened. "Wait a minute. The discounted rate we got for the venue was my wedding gift to you," I confirmed. 50% below market value." David, who had remained silent until now, stepped forward. "You gave us a half-price rate at one of the most exclusive venues in the region, even after Stephanie uninvited you?" I nodded. "Why would you do that?" he asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. "Because despite everything, we're family," I said simply. "And this venue has hosted every Mitchell wedding for 5 generations. I wasn't going to be the one to break that tradition." The room fell silent again, but the quality of the silence had changed. The hostility had diminished, replaced by confusion and, from some, the first glimmers of shame. Thomas cleared his throat. "The guests are still waiting for the cake-cutting ceremony. Should I inform them of a further delay?" Stephanie looked torn, clearly struggling between her anger at me and her duties as bride. "Your guests are waiting," I said gently. "We can continue this conversation another time." "So you can just drop this bomb and walk away?" she asked. But the fight had gone out of her voice. "I'm not going anywhere," I assured her. "Mitchell Gardens is my home now. I live in the East Wing apartment." "You live here?" Brian exclaimed. I nodded. "I've restored it to how it looked when our grandparents lived here. You're all welcome to see it sometime." Uncle Robert finally spoke again, his voice subdued. "All this time, you've been running this place. Making improvements. Preserving it." "Yes," I confirmed. The Mitchell Gardens estate was worth saving. Not just as a business, but as our family legacy. David approached Stephanie and took her hand. "We should return to our guests," he said quietly. "They're waiting." Stephanie hesitated, then nodded. As they moved toward the door, she paused and looked back at me. "This doesn't change anything," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "It changes everything," I replied. "But right now, it's still your wedding day. Go enjoy it." As the bride and groom left, followed by Brian and Aunt Catherine, only Uncle Robert, James, and Thomas remained in the room with me. "All these years," Uncle Robert said, almost to himself, "I thought I was protecting the family by keeping my financial troubles secret. And all along, you were the one actually protecting our legacy." For the first time in 20 years, I saw something in my uncle's eyes I'd never seen directed at me before: respect. James smiled at me. "So, does the owner of Mitchell Gardens get a seat at the family table? Or are you still banished to the back row?" Despite everything, I found myself smiling back. "Let's find out." The reception hall hummed with music and conversation when I re-entered with James beside me. The cake-cutting ceremony had just concluded, with Stephanie and David feeding each other small bites amid laughter and applause. From a distance, it looked like any joyful wedding, with no hint of the family drama unfolding behind the scenes. "I should probably leave," I said quietly to James. "I've caused enough disruption for one day." James looked surprised. "You're leaving? But you own the place." "Exactly why I should go. This is Stephanie's day, not mine. My presence is just causing tension." As I turned toward the exit, I felt a hand on my shoulder. David stood there, having broken away from the celebration. "Audrey." "Wait," he said. "Could we talk for a moment?" I nodded, following him to a quieter corner of the hall. "I want to thank you," he began, his sincerity evident, "not just for the venue discount, which is incredibly generous, but for how you've handled today. You could have exposed everything publicly and embarrassed the family, but you've been discreet." "I never wanted to ruin Stephanie's wedding," I assured him. "That was never my intention." "I believe you," he replied. "And I think deep down, Stephanie knows that too." He hesitated. "She's not always easy, but there's more to her than what you saw today." "I know," I acknowledged. "We share more history than you realize." David glanced toward his bride, who was watching us with evident tension. "Would you consider staying? As a gesture of reconciliation?" I was genuinely surprised by his request. "I'm not sure that's what Stephanie wants." "Maybe not yet," he admitted. "But marriages are about families, too, not just couples. I'd like to know my wife's family, all of it, including you." Before I could respond, James approached, looking determined. To my astonishment, he clinked a spoon against his champagne glass, calling for attention. "I'd like to say something," he announced, his voice carrying across the reception hall. Guests quieted, turning toward him expectantly. "Many of you know that our family has owned Mitchell Gardens for generations," he began. "What you don't know is that 3 years ago, when financial challenges arose, this beloved venue was nearly lost to our family forever." I felt my cheeks flush as I realized where his impromptu speech was heading. Uncle Robert and Aunt Catherine watched from nearby, expressions unreadable. "But someone stepped in," James continued. "Someone who understood what this place meant to our family history. My cousin Audrey. Yes, the same Audrey who some of you noticed was seated in the back row earlier, secretly purchased Mitchell Gardens to preserve our family legacy." Murmurs rippled through the crowd as eyes turned to find me. I fought the urge to disappear into the background. "She's been excluded and mistreated for years," James said, his voice growing passionate. "Yet she preserved our family legacy when no one else cared enough to save it. She gave Stephanie and David a massive discount for today's celebration, even after." He paused, glancing at his sister, even when circumstances might have justified less generosity. Stephanie's face flushed, a mixture of embarrassment and lingering anger. "So," James concluded, raising his glass, "I'd like to propose a toast to my cousin Audrey Mitchell, the owner of Mitchell Gardens estate and someone who truly understands what family means." A stunned silence followed, then scattered applause that gradually grew stronger. I stood frozen, unprepared for this public acknowledgement. David raised his glass toward me in salute, and after a moment, others followed suit. As the reception resumed, family members began approaching me one by one. Distant cousins I barely knew congratulated me on my business success. Elderly relatives reminisced about weddings held at the venue decades ago. Even Brian nodded acknowledgement from across the room, though he didn't approach directly. Most surprisingly, my Aunt Catherine found me as I admired the restored garden terrace, a project I'd overseen personally. "This was always my favorite spot," she said, standing beside me. "Your mother and I used to play here as girls." I remained silent, unsure how to respond to this unexpected opening. "When she died," Aunt Catherine continued, her voice catching slightly, "I couldn't look at you without seeing her. It was painful, too painful." "I know what you mean," I said quietly. "I couldn't look in mirrors for months after the accident. I have her eyes." "Yes, you do," my aunt agreed, really looking at me perhaps for the first time in years. "I should have been stronger for you." Instead, I distanced myself. "We can't change the past," I said. feeling the weight of 20 years of mutual hurt and misunderstanding. No, but perhaps we can do better going forward. She hesitated. Would you show me what you've done with the East Wing sometime? I haven't seen those rooms since your grandparents lived there. It was a small olive branch, but significant coming from her. I'd like that, I replied. As Aunt Catherine walked away, I noticed Uncle Robert watching from nearby. He approached slowly, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. I owe you an explanation, he began without preamble, about why I sold the venue and kept it from the family. You don't have to. I do, he insisted. Pride is a dangerous thing, Audrey. I was too proud to admit I'd made investment mistakes. Too proud to tell Catherine we needed to liquidate assets. I convinced myself I was protecting the family by handling it quietly. He shook his head. Instead, I nearly lost something irreplaceable. But you didn't, I pointed out. It's still in the family. Thanks to you, not me. He studied me with new respect. You've built something impressive on your own, haven't you? Without the family connections or advantages. I had good teachers, I acknowledged. My parents taught me resilience, even if they weren't here to see me apply those lessons. Uncle Robert nodded thoughtfully. Michael always was the practical one of us brothers. Laura, too, sharp as a tack with business sense to match. It was the first time in years he'd mentioned my parents so directly, acknowledging them as people rather than a tragedy to be overcome. I'd like to hear more about your business sometime, he said. Perhaps you could join us for dinner next month? Catherine's been asking about you. The invitation, however tentative, represented a seismic shift in our relationship. I'd like that, I replied. As the evening progressed, I found myself gradually included in conversations and photographs, no longer the outsider but not quite fully integrated either. It was a start, an opening where there had been only walls before. The moment that truly surprised me came as the band played a slow song and couples filled the dance floor. Stephanie approached where I stood watching, her expression complicated but no longer hostile. This doesn't fix everything, she said abruptly. You should have told me about the venue. Probably. I agreed. And you should have been honest about uninviting me instead of letting your father lie to the family. She flinched slightly at the direct challenge but didn't dispute it. We've never really understood each other, have we? We never really tried, I countered gently. Stephanie was quiet for a moment, watching her new husband chatting with guests across the room. David thinks we should start fresh. He says life's too short for family feuds. He seems like a good man, I observed. He is, she agreed. Too good for me, probably. She hesitated, then added, The venue looks beautiful. By the way, the restorations you've done? They're perfect. Coming from Stephanie, this qualified as effusive praise. Thank you, I said. I wanted to honor its history. Our history, she corrected, then extended her hand. Come on, there's an empty seat at the family table now, James insisted. As I followed her across the reception hall to join the family table for the first time, I caught Thomas's eye from across the room. He gave me a subtle thumbs up, his expression pleased but not surprised, as if he'd known all along this was how the day would end. For the first time in 20 years, I sat among the Mitchells not as an obligation or an afterthought, but as family. 6 months after Stephanie's wedding, I stood on the wide veranda of Mitchell Gardens estate, watching the October sunset paint the grounds in gold. The maple trees lining the main drive had turned brilliant red and orange, creating a natural archway that had made the venue particularly popular for fall weddings this season. In my hand, I held a letter from Uncle Robert, an actual handwritten letter, not an email or text. It detailed the Mitchell family meeting scheduled for the following weekend, with a formal agenda that included my presentation on the future vision for Mitchell Gardens Estate. The letter was addressed to Audrey Mitchell, proprietor, a small acknowledgement of respect that meant more than he likely realized. After the revelations at Stephanie's wedding, much had changed within the family dynamics. Some changes were immediate and dramatic, like James stopping by the estate regularly to learn about its history and operations. Others were slower, subtle shifts that had required time and patience to nurture. My relationship with Aunt Catherine had progressed through small, tentative steps. Our first proper conversation in the East Wing apartment had been stilted and formal, but as she recognized pieces of furniture from her childhood and photographs I'd preserved of the extended Mitchell family, her reserve gradually melted. By the third visit, she brought family albums I'd never seen, filling gaps in my knowledge about my parents and grandparents. Uncle Robert's approach to reconciliation was characteristically businesslike at first. He suggested quarterly family dinners, scheduled with the precision of board meetings. I'd found his attempts at control amusing, but recognized them as his way of creating safe structure around our evolving relationship. By the third dinner, he'd begun asking genuine questions about my business strategies and listening to my answers without interrupting. High praise from a man who typically dominated every conversation. Brian remained the most distant, still struggling with the revelation that the family legacy he'd taken for granted had nearly been lost through his father's financial missteps and saved by the cousin he'd dismissed for years. Our interactions were civil but minimal, which represented significant improvement from our previous open hostility. The most surprising development had been Stephanie. After returning from her honeymoon, she'd invited me to lunch. Awkward but well-intentioned. 2 weeks later, she'd called with questions about historic property investment, revealing an interest in real estate I'd never known we shared. Our conversations remained occasionally strained. Years of rivalry not easily forgotten, but we were finding common ground neither of us had thought possible. David had proven to be a positive influence, his natural diplomacy and genuine interest in family harmony helping to bridge difficult gaps. He'd become an unexpected ally in the gradual healing process, often serving as neutral territory when tensions arose. Thomas appeared on the veranda, interrupting my reflections. "The McCarthy wedding party is arriving for their rehearsal, Miss Audrey, and your 5 o'clock appointment is waiting in your office." "Thank you, Thomas," I replied, folding Uncle Robert's letter and slipping it into my pocket. "I'll be right there." As I walked through the grand entrance hall, I passed a newly installed photograph. My parents on their wedding day, standing on this very veranda, my mother's smile radiant as she looked at my father. I'd found the image in Aunt Catherine's albums and had it restored and framed. It now hung alongside photographs of other significant Mitchell family events, no longer hidden away like a painful memory but celebrated as part of our collective history. My office, once my grandfather's study, had become the heart of my operations at Mitchell Gardens. The antique desk that had intimidated me as a child now served as my workspace, where I balanced preserving history with creating a sustainable business. On the wall hung the original deed to the property, dating back to 1892, alongside the more recent documentation of my purchase, past and present in visual conversation. Today's appointment was with the local historical society, which had recently approached me about hosting their annual fundraiser. The event would feature an exhibition on prominent families in the region's development, including the Mitchells. It represented an opportunity to share our family's contributions with the wider community while supporting local history preservation, a perfect alignment with my vision for the estate. As I concluded the meeting and walked the Historical Society representatives to their car, I noticed James's truck coming up the drive. He waved, parking and jogging over to meet me. "Sorry I'm early," he said. "Finished my client meeting sooner than expected." "Perfect timing," I replied. "I could use your input on the new landscaping plans." We fell into step together, discussing the property's needs with the easy rhythm we'd developed over recent months. James had taken a genuine interest in Mitchell Gardens, offering his architectural expertise for several restoration projects. His enthusiasm and support had been instrumental in helping other family members accept my ownership. "Dad mentioned you're presenting at the family meeting next weekend," James said as we rounded the rose garden. "Nervous?" I laughed. "A little. It's one thing to run this place, another to lay out a 10-year plan with Uncle Robert watching my every expression." "He's impressed, you know," James said seriously. "Won't admit it outright, but I've heard him bragging to his golf buddies about his niece, the property magnate." This was news to me, and unexpectedly touching. "The family dinner afterward should be interesting," I said. "It's the first time everyone will be together since the wedding." "Including Stephanie and David," James confirmed. "They've got some news, apparently." Before I could inquire further, my phone rang. the special tone I'd assigned to Thomas for venue emergencies. I answered quickly, listening to his explanation of a scheduling conflict with next weekend's events. "I'll be right there," I assured him, ending the call. "Duty calls," I explained to James. "Want to join the crisis management session?" "Wouldn't miss it," he grinned. "Besides, someone needs to translate when you and Thomas start speaking in venue management code." As we headed back toward the main building, I reflected on how much had changed. 6 months ago, I had stood outside this venue as an uninvited outcast. Now, I moved through it confidently as both owner and family member, with genuine relationships beginning to form where once there had been only painful distance. Mitchell Gardens Estate had always been more than a property to me. It was a physical connection to parents I'd lost too young, to a family history I'd been excluded from but never stopped valuing. In saving it, I hadn't just preserved buildings and grounds. I'd created the opportunity for healing wounds I'd thought would remain forever open. The journey hadn't been easy, and not all relationships were fully mended. Some might never be. But standing on my own ground, both literally and figuratively, had changed something fundamental in how I approached these connections. I no longer sought approval or inclusion from a position of perceived weakness. Instead, I offered relationship from a place of strength and self-knowledge. That evening, after handling the scheduling crisis and reviewing landscaping plans with James, I hosted a small gathering in my apartment for the venue's senior staff, a monthly tradition I'd established to build team cohesion and celebrate successes. As we raised glasses in a toast to another record-breaking quarter, I looked around at these people who had become a kind of chosen family. To Mitchell Gardens, Thomas proposed, and to the Mitchell who saved it. Later, alone on the veranda once more, I watched lights being turned off across the property as staff departed for the night. The estate settled into peaceful, quiet crickets, providing gentle background music to my thoughts. Tomorrow would bring a corporate retreat to host, vendor meetings to conduct, and 1,000 operational details to manage. Next weekend would test newly formed family bonds and reveal whether reconciliation could truly take root. Beyond that stretched a future I was still shaping, both for Mitchell Gardens Estate and for myself. For the first time in 20 years, I felt myself truly belonging, not just to a place, but to a legacy I had earned the right to claim. I had preserved family history while creating my own place within it. And in doing so, I had found my way home. What's your experience with difficult family dynamics? Have you ever found yourself excluded from family events? And how did you handle it? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes the path to healing family wounds takes unexpected turns, just like mine did. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more real-life experiences. And don't forget to share with someone who might need to hear that family reconciliation is possible, even after years of hurt. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Remember that sometimes the most powerful position is the one you create for yourself.